Today I want to show you how much fun it is to let the piece take you where it wants to go. I started this piece with an idea in mind. Here's the image that I started to work from. From my sketch, I started to do this, and the work began to tell me that it wanted to go a different direction. It is a blast when a work does this because you never know where it's going to take you. Here's the finished piece that we're headed towards, and you'll see from the drawing that it is totally different, the direction it took. All we did, the only similarity is the dominant tree with the backlighting. So let's get started, and I'll show you the palette that I chose. I'll show you the direction I was headed, and then we'll show you how it changed once it decided it wanted to go a different direction. And here's the color wheel basis for the color selection. The blue-green or the turquoise is what's been in my mind all weekend, and I've seen a lot of these different colors, and it's like I want to paint something in that area. These are the pastels that I have selected out of the box. I'm trying to stay in the zone 5 and 6, 4, 5, and 6. So you can see this category here are the selections for the 4 and 5, and I've tried to select 6, although there may be a 7 in there since that zone is 6 and 7. So I'm trying to narrow my values, but keep the colors in an aqua and violet bias. It's not important the quality of these acrylics. They're just going to be used as an underpainting. They're going to get covered up. At least 80% of it will be covered up with pastel, and some of these colors will be the foundation onto which the pastels will go. Just like any other wash, whether it was an alcohol wash or a watercolor wash. Anybody that has seen my videos before knows that I work from drawings, not photographs, a series of plein air drawings, and any one of these I could have selected. I've decided to do this one and try to create it a little less sharp edged than what this drawing is. These thumbnail drawings, any artist that uses these develops their, after several hundred, you develop your own shorthand. So these drawings may not mean much to you, but they certainly tell me the information I need in order to paint from them. So I recommend, once you've experimented and gotten used to photographs, that you try to transfer over to drawings. You'll feel a freedom that you've never had before once you do so. The colors I've got in the acrylic palette, Hobby Lobby, their brand, they call this a Viridian. No, close to a Viridian that I'm used to. And then this right here is the Holbein, and this is Holbein Opera, which is a popular color if you ever watch Bob Blast. That's a really nice color to work with. This color is the Holbein Blue composition number 1, Holbein White Titanium. Another little blob here, white titanium. So I'll start out with these colors to wash something in. And you'll notice that I have a stain on here. This has nothing to do with the composition I'm working on. This was an old piece of 12 by 12 sanded that I had gessoed, and the gesso fixed some of the early failed painting that I decided I didn't want to rework. This is a wet pastel technique. The wet pastel techniques do take a paper that will stand up to multiple wettings. A watercolor, a thick drawing paper, etching paper, something that's heavy. A 60 or a 90 weight typically won't stand up to wet pastel techniques. You can see from my brush selection, there's nothing special about these brushes. Some of them are cheap hobby store brushes, and that's because we are working on sanded and rough surfaces with wet pastel techniques. Wet pastel techniques will chew up a good quality brush in no time. And at this particular stage, as an underpainting, I'm going for large shapes. So I'm going to start with the large shapes first. I want to establish this tree that's got rim light around it, so that's going to be my first large shape. Since this stained paper, I want to get that tree set into place. We're not putting the paint on very thick. You'll probably, by the time this dries, see some of that underpainting or stain come through, but I'm not too concerned about that because, like I said, we're just trying to establish a shape here and get some base color down that will inform how I'm going to get those other colors in pastel on top. I'm not too concerned at all that these underpaintings are not the right hue, but they are in the family that and at the beginning of this that I'm intending to try to get into that aqua, blue aqua, turquoise sort of feeling, since that's what precipitated the idea with this drawing. I'm just going to put a little bit of that rim light around this. It will change significantly as the painting progresses. Right now, it's kind of a place setter, just so I know where to bring the sky up near. I've had a little Hobby Lobby ultramarine blue acrylic so that with that opera I can get a nice violet. Mix that violet up. I want these trees in the background to have a little bit of that violet as they go up this hillside. And it worked out some of that stain could be used in those trees on the far right. Some of the stain that was left from the pastel before this. There's a shrub right in here because of this big open space in my drawing that is kind of stopping the viewer from going off the page there a little bit. And it will have a slight slant in towards this, so we have the compositional lines going this way, getting stopped up in this area, these lines kind of bringing you back through, this coming up, this coming up. As you can see, I've lost the rim light. I added a little Holbein primary yellow, mixed it with that opera to get this kind of peachy violet, sort of gray violet going on here. So I'm going to firm up that light, rim light coming around that tree just a little bit. And the pastels, of course, will make it look more like a tree. Again, we're just working with big shapes. Trying to lay in the big shapes and the forms that we'll build upon as we go forward. And I put a little peach up in here. We might break up that sky a little bit with a little puffy cloud here and there. If I don't like it, I can take it out and put it in, but it's just kind of a little reminder to do something with, make that sky more interesting than just be a blank. Now that I've got the blue on there and I can create a little darker blue violet, I'm going to get this shadow firmed up just a little bit more because I want to tone this down. But if I tone this down and I don't first go into here, I'll lose my shadow quite a bit. So we're going to get it in there. Doesn't look like much. As I always say, you got to go through ugly before you get to beautiful. And there's always that stage. I remember when I was a beginner that I didn't know about the ugly. I just thought I was painting ugly. I get to this stage blocking stuff in. Everybody says block it in, block it in, block it in. And I do it and it's like, oh my gosh, this thing is ugly. Oh, what am I going to do? Oh, this is horrible. And I just quit. I wouldn't get past the ugly. I wouldn't realize that on the other side of ugly, Cinderella is waiting to go to the dance. So, you know, just think, Cinderella's out there waiting to get her slippers and the makeup done and get all that soot off her face. So we're going to go through ugly before we get to pretty. It's just the way it is. Get used to it. I've grayed down a little aqua just as a place setter. Try to get the values down on this so that when I start adding pastel, I'll be close to value and I can even it up. I'm starting to like how this is getting a painterly look and some of these values are coming down now that you get it all filled in. You can see how I'm scrubbing with this brush. These brushes don't hold up to this on sanded paper, and the gesso texture that was on here from the previous pastel. There's a lot of texture on here from that gesso, and I love to work with texture. If you're just getting started and you're not used to texture, what I'm showing you will apply to any underpainting you do, so don't worry about trying to duplicate my texture. The acrylic paint, if you're used to painting with acrylic or watercolor as an underpainting, or even just as a solo medium, use your blending techniques. Your goal here is to try to get as close to the values that you want and as close to the parent colors that you might start out with the pastel sticks. Okay, my goal now is to just use a little light, very light touch, so you can see the skips and jumps that are in there. And I'm going to go over the underpainting with some of the blue-greens that I selected. And at some point I will stop following the underpainting and go back to what is informed in the drawing and the thumbnail that I had. So this is just to try to get as much pastel on and fill in some of those spaces. Now this is way too bright of a violet, but I want to establish some of that underneath there, and then when I lay over some of the other colors, I'm thinking ahead and allowing a little on-canvas mixing when you see those values there. But the whole idea here is just to start to get some color laid in. And remember, I wanted to go with the turquoise, and the turquoise has some green in it, and this violet has some red in it. So I'll be able to cover this and end up with some grays in my underpainting. Now at some point I'll let the painting guide me, in which case I'm no longer going to, if it goes to blue-violet, it'll go to blue-violet. But again, my intent was to start out with some of these turquoise colors. And those are still a little bright. That's a little bit better. I put that light underneath, so the light turquoise underneath is lightening up this color here that was originally on top of it. Just like in the underpainting with the acrylic, we have to go through ugly with the underpainting with the pastel also. So if you're not used to creating and destroying shapes and building up layers, this will be very, very uncomfortable for you for the first time. So as you can see, we've got 80% of that acrylic covered, and it was just a guide to get us one more layer. So we've already gotten about 3 layers of pastel color on here. And now that I've established the pastel values through the 4, 5, and 6 range, I can go back in here and I can firm up what was in that drawing. I love and I want to paint frothy air around an object. So blurring this is normal for me, but as I said, if you're not used to destroying things and reestablishing them, this will seem very odd and you may want to quit. But don't quit, hang in there. Because once you reestablish these shapes, the edges will start to develop some character. After destroying that, I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to take some of the original pastels that created the shape of that tree without the rim light, and I'm going to reestablish that. And it's a constant process of revisiting the shapes, because every time you do, you soften an edge, you create more interest where the layer shows through, and this will be destroyed again partially destroyed in a controlled process in order to accomplish the end goal here. I'm going to let the painting tell me where it wants to go, but I have had too heavy of a hand. So what I'm going to do here is I take a little bit of gesso, it's a clear gesso, and I add a little liquid to it, a little water, and I'm making a painting medium. This wet painting slurry, I can move the pastel around and create a different painting, and I will try to create some drips by pressing against the panel, and we'll see what comes out. I'll show you what it looks like after I get the pastel all wetted down, and we'll see what kind of ghosts come up after I make a destruction this time. But that's the slurry that I will use to paint over the dry pastel on the painting and create an acrylic paint, but this time with the pastel, and often I get a better result than I do with an acrylic paint or a watercolor underpainting. Sometimes the paintings will go a different direction. So getting that gesso on there, this is starting to look like water in an inlet. Around me there's some lakes that have a lot of trees and inlets. I'm starting to see some of that in the fog and the mist that's created. So there'll be a lot of nice places that I can follow along and create either light coming through trees or lighter colored tree trunks. But this definitely is a more advanced pastel, wet pastel technique. I'm not saying you beginners don't try it, I'm just saying it will challenge you. There's nothing more that I like than a challenge rather than just straight painting. These things, I love the discovery process. And so if you're looking for things that will let you discover and let the painting tell you what to do, wet pastel is it. Ever since I discovered using wet pastel beyond the opening stages of a painting, it's just been so freeing and it's been so much fun. Okay, we're going to let that dry, not overwork it. You can overwork it and get too many lines, and then it starts to become too realistic rather than this ethereal fog that I'm going for. This is drying down much lighter, but it is telling me where it's going to go. I'm going to stop there for today and explain what I would do to finish this. I will let it set a while, but I suspect that these highlights in here will need to be strengthened because I still want to create this light effect coming from behind. If you do your golden thirds, you'll see that this is the area that that light has to come in if it's going to be the center of interest behind this tree. So I still have some work to do up in here. I believe this purple needs to be toned down a little bit. I'll gray that down. This is a little vague still, so there'll be some details that go in there. And I'll check my highlights through here to make sure that I've got a level horizon. But I'll firm up some of the branches in this, since the center of interest will be in this 1/3 area here. So I want to keep the branches just subtle and vague and out of focus. That's something that I like to do, is put my sharpest part of the image where my center of interest is in most cases. So this is a good example of how a piece will start out as something totally different, and then I recognize that the piece is starting to have a mind of its own, and I decide to follow the direction that the piece is going to go. Well, that was fun. It took off a totally different direction, as you can see, from the beginning of the sketch that I began with and the beginning concept, and even the color palette changed on me as the painting took off in a different direction all on its own. Those sort of paintings I just love to do. It drives some artists crazy, but if you will stop trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, sometimes you can end up with a better painting than what you envisioned when you decided, I want to paint this or I want to paint that. So hopefully that was helpful, and we'll do more of that as time goes on, but for now, that's it, and hopefully you'll stick with me for next week. So happy painting, stay happy, be well. Bye-bye, everybody.